Perfect. So thank you very much for inviting me today to present this self-assessment tool. It's actually a great pleasure to be with you here today and to see also the very important participation from the different LGUs across Poland. This is always a very good news. So as was introduced, I'll present today this self-assessment tool for local self-governments in Poland. As has been mentioned, this self-assessment tool is part of the project Better Governance, Planning and Services in Local Self-Governments in Poland that we have been conducting during this last year, in close, of course, cooperation with the Association of Polish Cities and the Ministry of Development Fund and Regional Policy. We started this process, I think, 1 year ago now, more than 1 year ago now, and this self-assessment tool is one of the key outputs of this project. We have several other outputs that you'll get familiar with. I know that you know that at the end of this process, we will release an important report with several recommendations for all levels of governments in different aspects of local governance. So let's turn to my presentation now. Today, I'll briefly give you and present you some of the objectives of this self-assessment tool. I would also like to take some time to share with you what was the process that we took to actually design this self-assessment tool, which was a participatory process, if I may say. I'll also recall why this self-assessment tool is important, and then I'll turn into the structure of the self-assessment tool, which I'll refer to it sometimes as the SAT, as you can see in the screen, and what are the key steps to implement this self-assessment tool. So, what are the key? Let me find something on the screen. Okay. So, what are the key objectives of this self-assessment tool? I would say that this tool has two main objectives. First, this SAT is intended to help and support local actors assessing the LSTU status in key governance dimensions that I'll explain more in detail afterwards. And this key governance dimension that we have kind of selected are the ones that may affect investments undertaken by local administrations, service delivery, and local development. But I would like to also emphasize that as important as the assessment itself, the second objective of the tool is actually helping local self-government units to create consensus within the local administrations on the actions that should be taken to better deliver on local development priorities, improve the way in which services are delivered, and strengthen internal management procedures to function more effectively. So let's go now to the design process. This self-assessment tool has been, of course, developed in close partnership with the APC and the Ministry of Development Funds and Regional Policies, and the local governments themselves. There are 5 key things that were taken into account to elaborate this self-assessment tool. First of all, we developed, at the beginning of this project, we developed an OECD questionnaire. It was a comprehensive questionnaire to assess the LSSG's situation with respect to 8 key governance dimensions that actually are the pillar of this tool. I'll go into the details of these 8 governance dimensions afterwards. The tool also builds upon different fact-finding missions that we conducted in Poland. We had the opportunity to actually visit some of the LGUs this year, actually the beginning of this year. Then we had some virtual missions as well with some LGUs. And we had meetings also with the national and regional stakeholders. And of course, we received several and different inputs from both partners that I mentioned. So beyond this engagement that we had with different stakeholders in Poland, this tool is also it's also based, and this is very important to mention, on different OECD recommendations and instruments that have been officially validated by all OECD countries. So this is not coming out of nowhere. This is based actually on what OECD countries have agreed on that are good practices and that represent the best standards, if I may say. We also had two rounds of workshops where several LGUs participated, and from those workshops we gathered several feedback. We piloted this tool to see if it was of course useful, where we could improve this tool. We received very valuable input from the different LGUs, and this is how we came out with this final version of the tool. This is just to show you, as I mentioned, that this tool is based on OECD recommendations. These are some examples of these recommendations and instruments that I was referring to. So we have, for example, the principles on rural policy, the recommendation on effective public investment across levels of government, the framework on sound public governance, the recommendation on budgetary governance, etc. So here is it's a kind of compilation of all the tools that we use for this purpose. So why is this self-assessment tool important? I think it's important that we all have this in mind, because understanding why this self-assessment tool is important helps in actually familiarizing with this tool and actually using it in a kind of daily basis. So there are many reasons, but the first and something that it's of course the basic purpose of the tool is that it facilitates the assessment of the main public governance strengths and gaps that may affect the short, medium, and long-term efficiency and functioning of the local administration. It's also an instrument that helps LGUs planning the actions that will help filling in these gaps. Of course, always with the objective of better delivering services and enhancing local sustainable development and well-being. But as I already mentioned, and I think this is something that I'll emphasize throughout my presentation, this is also about the process. So this is also something that allows the engagement with different stakeholders, both within but also outside the local administration. And this helps, of course, to map and understand what are the existing gaps and challenges. And the previous speaker, Mr. Marek, I'm sorry for my very bad pronunciation of your name, but I think that you made a really good work in emphasizing the importance of this aspect. And last but not least, this self-assessment tool also allows building ownership because of all this engagement process. And so the ownership on the measures that local governments can take to build together a local development plan. So let's turn now into the content of the self-assessment tool itself. We have identified three areas that you can see here in the screen, and that was they were also mentioned before. And these actually are the three areas that you will go into the details during this morning, this seminar. So the first one is enhancing local development, and in this area we have identified 6 dimensions and we have defined indicators for each of these 6 dimensions. The first one being local development challenges and opportunities, strategic planning, monitoring and evaluation, subnational finance, intermunicipal cooperation, and coordination, what we call vertical coordination, or the coordination across levels of government. Then we have the second area, which is focused on improving service delivery. And here we have 5 dimensions: digitalization, open government, monitoring and evaluation, regulatory assessments, and administrative burden and public procurement. And the last area of this tool is related to strengthening internal management processes. And here we have three key dimensions. The first one being coordination across the administrative units, budgeting, public employment, and management. So for each of these areas and dimensions, we have defined indicators that you will get familiar with in details. And for each of these 3 indicators, and of course based on what I just mentioned, based on OECD recommendations, based on OECD countries' good practices, but also based on the dialogue that we engage with you, we have defined these 3 levels of maturity. So the first level it's what we've called the initial or baseline level, and it identifies the basic actions that LGUs can take and reflects that the system in question or the conditions are not necessarily in place or are not functioning well, or maybe are limited to what is basically required by law. Then we have the intermediate level, or the satisfactory level. And this reflects that the dimension is better understood. It brings some organization and standardization and systematization of practices. And it reflects that the LGU has implemented some steps to advance, but that improvements are still needed. And the third level of maturity, or what we call the optimized or good practice level, reflects that the system in place works in a satisfactory way, and it also reflects that the LGU has proactively implemented measures to perform at its best. So I would like now to turn into the implementation of the self-assessment tool. And the question here is how to make out the most of this tool. So I would like to emphasize that this is an instrument that is meant to be used regularly by LGUs. The idea is that actually local authorities and local stakeholders get familiar with this tool, and that this tool kind of accompanies you in a daily basis to help you identify what are the actions that should be taken and what are the actions that should be prioritized. So this is not, what I'm thinking here is this is not just a tool that you read once and then you forget about it, but you have it in your desk, you have it as an instrument, as something, a document that actually supports you in the decision-making process. So to accomplish this, there are some characteristics of the tool that we've tried to follow when designing it. First, we've chosen to design, we've chosen a design that kind of facilitates as much as possible its use by everybody. We've also tried to use simple language, and of course, this is not always possible because there are some technical words that cannot be replaced. And when that was the case, we've added a glossary defining the key terms at the end of the tool. We also have considered when designing this tool that this should be completed in a reasonable amount of time. Of course, this is not something that should add some kind of burden to your daily life, but on the contrary, to facilitate your life. But at the same time, this tool is expected to be comprehensive, integrating all the key aspects to enhance local development and better serve citizens. And while simple, we've also tried to make it as specific as possible in order to allow for a proper self-diagnosis. So this is, of course, this was very challenging, but I think the result is good. So as I've mentioned before, for this self-assessment to be useful and effective, the process undertaken to complete the self-assessment itself is as relevant as the results of the analysis. This is why the tool puts a lot of emphasis on this process. Okay, so in this respect, the first thing to consider is that LDUs should ensure participation and engagement from all relevant actors. And when I refer to all relevant actors, I'm not only referring to internal actors or people working within the LGU administration, but in some cases also engaging and promoting the participation from other different stakeholders, thus the private sector, maybe citizens as well, because this will help in building ownership over the self-assessment results across the LGU administrative structure, but also beyond. And it also helps in conducting a more effective and smooth implementation of the action plan that will result and that will be developed after this self-assessment exercise is conducted. So this is why this exercise requires a broad participation at all stages of implementations. And at the same time, this is also an opportunity to actually build capacities and engage in a dialogue process. So we have defined 5 key stages to implement the SAT. We've called this a participatory process. So let me go now into the details of these stages. So the first stage is to form a multi-stakeholder task force that gathers actors from different areas of the LGU administration. And some of the key elements for this stage is that this task force should be, of course, responsible for the entire exercise to ensure the participation and buy-in from all staff. And something that is very important here is that the representation of the whole administration should be balanced. And of course, LGUs should put an extra effort in including actors that are traditionally underrepresented in the decision-making process. The local governments might also want to involve some external stakeholders, as I mentioned, that could help in further ensuring the credibility and legitimacy of this process. The second stage of the implementation goes into the substance, actually, and is the analysis of the current situation and the identification of the level of maturity. So here we suggest to follow some steps in this exercise, and we suggest that, for example, first the members of this task force should conduct an individual analysis of the LGU current situation per dimension. And why is important? Why this is important? Because if all the members they do this exercise kind of alone, it allows to reduce the bias that can come from the interaction with other people. But of course, when after this individual analysis has been done, the idea is to discuss it among the members of the task force and conduct a preliminary identification of what are the main gaps and areas for improvement per dimension, guided by the indicators. Then the idea is to, once a consensus among the task force on these main gaps and the areas for improvement has been reached, the idea is to engage in a dialogue beyond the task force and with relevant stakeholders in the LGU administration, but also outside. The idea is also here to kind of fill in the information gaps, or to see whether the information that you have is accurate or not, etc. And after that, of course, comes the final identification of the gaps and areas for improvement to be addressed per area and dimension. Then stage 3, it's about the definition of the actions that should be taken for improvement. Here it's important again to consult and engage with different stakeholders to define what should be these priorities for improvement, and elaborate simple list of these prioritized measures to address these gaps, and of course move towards higher levels of maturity per dimension. Then the fourth stage is about the elaboration, actually the elaboration of the action plan that should be taken after this assessment has been conducted. The idea is that this action plan has clearly sets the priorities and the common vision of the LGU. This is about prioritizing and taking what are the main actions that will be from this big list that you end up before, taking some elements that will actually be the ones that will be prioritized for this action plan. And something that it's very important in this step is to actually identify which staff, people, and what units will be responsible for implementing each of these actions, and define specific time frame for its implementation. And the final stage is about the communication of this action plan within the local government administration and beyond, if during this process you engage with different stakeholders. And this is, of course, something that kind of closes the engagement process, because it has to, if you involve people, of course, at the end you have to communicate clearly and efficiently what has been the result of this engagement, and this also helps to create commitment of LGU staff for the improvement of the actions, for the improvement of the chosen actions, and to actually implement it and use them. So just to summarize in a nutshell, the self-assessment results and the process itself to actually conduct this analysis are equally important. this process needs to be clear, and that's why we've developed this 5 stages kind of model to follow in order to actually make out the most of this tool. All the relevant stakeholders should be engaged to create ownership in this process. This self-assessment tool should be used regularly to identify improvements and prioritize actions. And something, let me emphasize something that I think it's key here, is that this self-assessment tool is a reference also for other OECD countries and local governments in other OECD countries. Of course, this tool is adapted to the Polish reality, but it also serves as an instrument, as a guiding instrument for other countries to follow. So that's it. Thank you very much.